Love the look of embroidered smocking, but looking for a fast way to pull it off? I'm Tova with Professor Pincushion, and today I'm going to show you how to do machine smocking. Well, this is not true smocking. It's a quick way to get a similar and adorable look using your sewing machine. You can use this method to create decorative panels to add to your projects. Ready to see how it's done? Let's go ahead and get started. With this technique, you're gathering up your fabric very tightly. So you have to start with a great deal of fabric. So whatever the finished amount you want it to be, the finished length, I would at least multiply that by 5 to get the amount of fabric you should start with. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do some basting stitches to start the gathering process. Now you don't have to use a fabric marker like I do, but I'm essentially drawing some lines on my fabric, or you can just do it at your sewing machine using the little seam guide and not worry about drawing it. And I have them about 5/8 of an inch apart. Now I just did 3 lines, but probably to start off with, you're going to do 5 lines. The basting stitch is going to be the longest stitch on your machine, so you just change the length. And you don't have to worry about doing any back stitching. You're doing it for the full length of your fabric, or however long your fabric is. And the number of lines that you're basting really just depends on how wide you want your finished piece to be. On one end, I'm going to take all my thread tails here on each line, and I'm going to do a hand knot. And I'm just doing this on one side. So I'm going to form a loop, bring the tail through the loop, and then I'm going to pull it through, and that's going to create a knot. This is so when we pull on the other side, the bobbin thread or the top thread doesn't actually start pulling through the fabric. So I'm going to do it for all these, and then once you do your knots, you can go ahead and trim this off. Traditionally, when you're doing smocking, it's actually a series of tiny pleats that are all gathered together. Now you can get that effect with a pleating machine, but I don't have one of those, and most people don't have one of those. So we're just going to fake it with a bunch of gathering. So to do that, I'm going to go to the other end, so the opposite side of where I did the knots, and I'm going to take my bobbin threads. So I just pulled all my top threads out of the way, and you can do this all at the same time instead of pulling them individually. And I'm going to hold this with my right hand, hold my fabric with my left hand, and I'm going to start gathering my fabric. And you want it to gather really tightly, so you can see all these tight little gathers. And I'm going to move it down until the whole length of my fabric looks like this. You want to be careful that you don't accidentally break your threads as you're pulling it, so you don't want to pull too hard. If it gets really tight and it doesn't seem like it's working very much, just take some of your gathering and just start moving it down on the fabric, and then you should be able to start pulling it again. You can see how much it gathers up. This is why you want to use a lightweight fabric when you're doing this. I'm using a lightweight cotton here because you don't want it to end up too bulky. Once you have it all gathered up, you can go ahead and use the tails down here to tie another knot, so we can make sure that the gathering is not going to come out as we're working with it. I want to make sure that this is going to lie flat as I'm sewing it through my sewing machine. So you're just going to flatten it best you can. And up here we have a lot of bulk. You could just kind of pull some of these pleats to kind of straighten it out. You could do the same thing down here. Kind of make it a little bit more uniform. And then you can use your iron also to kind of press the whole thing down. So now the fun part, you get to select a decorative stitch that you're just kind of doing in the center of your basting stitches here. And I'm just using regular all-purpose thread, but you can use a more decorative thread if you wish. I'm also using a walking foot because I feel like it helps so it's not pressing down on my gathers as much, but you're kind of limited in the type of stitches you can do if they're a little bit wider. If you want to do a wider decorative stitch, you might have to switch to your decorative stitch foot. I just stuck with a zigzag stitch for mine, so you can see that in between my basting stitches. Now, if you want to use it in a garment. It doesn't have any stretch. So you're basically inserting it into your garment as a panel. And I do that before I cut out any pattern pieces. You do need to make sure that you do leave enough seam allowance above and below. Let's say this is the fabric I'm going to use for my doll shirt, but I want to have this little smocking panel inserted into that shirt. So again, this is before I even cut out any pattern pieces. This is the fabric I'm going to be cutting my pattern out of. I'm going to insert this before I cut out my pattern pieces. So I'm going to cut my fabric and I'm going to separate them. Then I'm going to take this and I'm going to sew it in between these two panels, and you're just doing a regular seam. So this is my right side, so I'm going to flip it right side to right side for this side, and you can go ahead and trim this down if you want, so you're looking at more of a 5/8 inch seam allowance. And I'm just going to sew a seam. Then you could press your seam open, and again you could cut this off so you're not dealing with a lot of excess. And then I'm going to do the same thing on this side. So what you end up with is something that looks like this. So after I sew it, I press it so it's lying flat again, and I trimmed off all my excess. I did it with a serger, so it's a little bit easier. So this is now my fabric, and I can go ahead and grab my pattern piece that I want that little smocking panel on, and I can kind of decide, where do I want it on my shirt? Do I want it down here at the bottom, or do I want it more on top? And now I can pin this and cut it all around, and then you're going to have this smocking piece exactly where you want it on your pattern. I just want to point out, before you cut out your pattern pieces, you can go ahead and remove those basting stitches. I just think it makes it look a lot neater. And that's how you do some quick machine smocking. We hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Please subscribe to get notified of our weekly releases. Also check out ProfessorPincushion.com to view our complete library with well over 350 sewing tutorials. If you would like to directly support us, you can check out our Patreon campaign and earn some exclusive perks. Thanks for watching.